In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Please be seated. Suffering happens. Only slightly less well known than the universal truth of death is the universal truth of suffering and pain. Everyone suffers. And our scriptures show us that they always have. You see it in Jeremiah, where the prophet is speaking to the Jewish exiles, especially the leaders, people who have been ripped from their homes and will never see their homes again. In 2 Timothy, Paul is writing from prison, where he says that he was chained like a criminal. And in Luke, Jesus encounters 10 lepers who have lived in constant pain and a socially imposed exile from their communities and even from their own homes and families. Suffering happens. It has always happened. It is happening today. You see it in the news. Just pick any news outlet you choose, and you will see the news of suffering. You think of the Kurds being attacked by Turkey. Think of the latest mass shooting. Think of the latest example of anti-Semitism when, for example, with that attack on that Holocaust memorial in White Plains. We see it even closer to home in our own lives. We see it in physical pain, maybe through surgery or injury, or just our bodies betraying us after a certain number of years. And we see it in emotional pain too. In arguments, in the loss of a loved one, in broken relationships, and in general doubt. Suffering happens then and now. But the gospel tells us that God is in the pain with us. God is always with us in the pain. But how? And what does it matter? Well, sometimes it is in the presence of those who sit with us even as we suffer. You've seen this at hospitals where it just does immeasurable good for somebody simply to be there. Presence matters. And in Jeremiah, they had the people of God there. They were not alone in their suffering. They had each other. And not only were they called to support each other, but they learned how to even care for those amongst whom they lived in captivity. Because as the prophet says, they are God's children too. God was with them in the pain. As hard as that was to accept, God was with them, all of them. Now sometimes God's presence is a little harder to see. Sometimes it's deeper within us because there's nobody around. And you look at Paul, he was abandoned by all of his friends and left alone in prison. But inside, in here, he knew and felt God's presence. He knew and felt God's love. He knew and felt God's peace. And so he had hope. The hope to keep doing the work that God had given him, even in the pain. And sometimes knowing God's presence in pain is in the hope of healing. Like those lepers who cried out to Jesus from the road. They cried out to him because they knew they could trust him. Now, I don't know for sure that they were positive he could actually heal them, but they knew they could trust him. And they knew that he would do what he could, because that's who he was. That's who he is. Because God is with everyone in the pain. Always. We are a faith that looks and holds up one such person, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, God incarnate. In our very faith, we understand that Jesus knew the pain that we know in our lives. Intimately, physically, emotionally, and really. Our faith focuses on the physical incarnation of God in the form of Jesus because He was a real person. One who shows us how much God understands what it is to be us. This doesn't make the suffering disappear. Just because God is with us in the pain doesn't mean the pain goes away. Jesus never promises that. All Jesus ever promises is that God is with us in that pain. But does that really matter? Does it matter that God's with us if the pain doesn't go away? The answer is yes. A resounding yes. It is everything. It puts everything into perspective. It promises that pain and suffering are temporary. But God's love will hold us through it all and lift us up in the end. Suffering happens. There will always be pain, but God will always be with us in it. And in the age to come, when the pain is gone, God will be there too. Amen.